Good evening to everyone. My name is Professor Corinna Hawkes. I'm delighted to welcome you to this special event this evening. In lieu of our full City Food Symposium 2020, we're hosting a special event with youth, talk about meaningful engagement with youth with a focus on the food system. I'm going to wait a couple more minutes to allow more participants to join, and then I'll continue. So just hang on for a couple of minutes, those of you already joined. Okay, welcome everyone to this City Food Symposium 2020 special event on harnessing the power of youth to transform food systems for health and sustainability. My name is Corinna Hawkes. I'm Director of the Centre for Food Policy, and I'm delighted to chair this event, which is a question and answer session with a fantastic panel of people, including young people, including youth, to talk about meaningful engagement with youth and how to do that and what works well and what needs to happen to support youth engagement to improve the food system for health and sustainability. We're in the midst of a climate emergency, as you all know. We're in the midst of a situation where poor quality diets are the world's leading cause of ill health. We desperately need effective and equitable public policy to transform food systems for health and sustainability. And it's become very apparent in past years that unless we have meaningful engagement with youth and we are able to empower youth, we're able to learn from young people in this effort, we won't be successful. There are a variety of initiatives now talking about youth engagement, and this event this evening is one of them. We're absolutely delighted to have posted online earlier today a series of talks from most of the panel members here, plus a couple who weren't able to attend this evening. And I would strongly encourage you to watch those videos, which are very powerful in sharing the message of how to engage with youth and why it matters in the food system. Tonight, or perhaps it may be elsewhere in the day for others of you not based in the UK, but now you've got the opportunity to ask those questions about engagement with youth, including and mainly around in the food system. So that's what this event is about. It's about asking questions and getting answers in real time. We will be giving those panelists that you can hopefully see in front of you a platform for talking and sharing their experiences. We'll be giving a taster of youth leadership in the food system. And we're laying out some key issues and questions that we may well take forward in a full City Food Symposium next year, though that is yet to be confirmed. So we would ask all the panelists, you're here to ask questions and to get answers. Please post those questions in the Q&A box. And those questions, please focus them on the questions you have about how to meaningfully engage with youth to change the food system. Maybe you want to comment and share some of your own experiences. Maybe you want to comment on what's been said. That's also fine, but do keep those questions coming in. We really do have a fantastic set of panelists to answer them. If you want to tweet about this event, most of all, we want you to focus, we want you to learn, we want you to engage. But if you do want to tweet, the hashtag is #CityFoodSym, and our handle is @FoodPolicyCity. The event is being recorded, So no need to take notes. You can listen to it afterwards if you need to. If you want to sign up to our mailing list about this event, please tape your name and email address into the chat functions and send it to the panelists, and we will take note of that. So it's great to have you all with us. Great to have the panelists with us. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a minute. But before I start the session, I'd like to invite the funder of this event, the Worshipful Company of Cooks, in particular David Smith, the master of the Worshipful Company of Cooks, who generously support this City Food Symposium, to say a few words. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Corinna, and thank you for inviting me to sort of kick this off. May I start by saying congratulations to everyone of the presentations, because actually I watched them earlier today and they're really impressive, and they're just what we need at the moment, because now is the time that we need this sort of energy coming to use the power of youth. You might ask, why would the Worshipful Company of Cooks actually be interested in a symposium like that? And I perhaps ought to start by saying who we are, because I imagine that a good number of people have probably never heard of the company, let alone know what we do. We started some 700 years ago, and in those days London was much smaller than it is now, and we started as a trade guild. If you wished to open a restaurant in London, which in those days was known as a cook shop, you had to be a member of the Company of Cooks, the Guild of Cooks. And the same applied for quite a number of other trades like fishmongering or butchering or goldsmiths. And along with that right that we had to regulate the trade and who came into it, we also had quite a lot of responsibilities. Responsibilities today, which we would call environmental, health, trading standards. We needed to regulate the trade to make sure that the quality of the restaurants, cook shops was actually proper, that the training with next generation was done, that the apprentices were well trained and indeed well treated. And that lasted all the way through until just over 100 years ago, by which time national legislation had taken over many of the responsibilities that we had. So we have now evolved into what is fundamentally a large charitable organization. And we have, as one of our principal objectives, the support of training and education relevant to food and cookery, with the particular focus right at the moment on diet and nutrition being absolutely vital parts. Now that means our interest is at all levels of education and training, from the basic, where we sponsor some training at Westminster Kingsway College, New City College in London. We sponsor our own apprentice program that lasts 2 years for about 32 people at a time. And we go right the way up to sponsoring a prize for the MSc student at the Centre for Food Policy at City. And we have been doing that for some time. So we're very keen that we cover all sections of education, and hence our interest in this particular symposium. Along with City, the Centre for Food Policy, we've actually had a recent input into the National Food Strategy here in Britain. And we do actually greatly admire the work that's being done here at the Food Policy Centre, particularly about diet, nutrition, and the reduction in youth obesity, because that's absolutely vital for improving the long-term health of our nation. And as some of the presentations I saw today have made clear, the lessons that we learn through work that you're doing are replicable really quite easily across the globe. And it doesn't matter whether the lesson is learnt in Europe or Africa or Asia. Actually, most of the lessons that we are learning at the moment can be used right the way across the globe. And the timing of this symposium really couldn't be much better, because it's become very clear during this COVID pandemic that one of the major risk factors for people who catch the disease is obesity. The chance of death from the disease is much greater if people are overweight than if they are fit and healthy. And I congratulate the university and the Centre for Food Policy for actually not only thinking of having this online event, but actually for making it work so successfully. I think it would be an understatement to say that we live in difficult times, but it's remarkable that you've been able to pull this off. So thank you for that. And this is just the time for the voice of young people to be heard. You are, after all, the leaders of tomorrow. You need to be heard and heard loudly, whether it's about diet and nutrition, which are our particular interests, or environmental sustainability, since those two things are actually inextricably linked. And your generation is ideally placed to challenge the conventional wisdom of the established system. You have the future right ahead of you. So I think City is doing a great job in bringing all this together. And I look forward to hearing a stimulating question and answer session. And indeed, I look forward to next year's symposium when, with a bit of luck, we'll all be able to get back together physically, not just across the globe virtually as we are. Corinna, back to you.
Thank you very much, David Smith, the master of the Worshipful Company of Cooks. Thank you for your support and those kind words and excellent introduction. Thank you. So with no further ado, we will move on to the question and answer session. So what I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and ask them a particular question. So I'd like to start with Kajal Odedra, and please introduce yourself. But Kajal works at change.org, is executive director, and isn't working as a specialist in the food area. But I think change.org is such an incredibly important platform that engages with all audiences, including youth, that it's an important indicator that we can, it's an example of how we can learn in the food system from outside of the food system. So Kajal, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about how change.org does engage with young people?
Yeah, hi, it's really good to be here. Thanks for having me. So change.org, for people who aren't completely familiar, we're a petition platform. We're the world's largest, and in the UK, we have just over 19 million people who've started and signed petitions on the platform. And so that's, 1 in 3 of the population. And I'd say what's relevant to this conversation is how young people have used the platform, particularly in issues of sustainability and food, and created change in a way that I don't think that a NGO, politician or adult could have done. I'll just give you a really quick example. A few years ago, we had a young person called Lucy Gavahan start a petition on our site. She was 13 at the time, and she has rescue hens and cares deeply about her pets. And when she found out what had happened to those hens, and the fact that the eggs that we were buying in supermarkets had come from caged factory farms where the hens were treated, with very little space in incredibly inhumane ways. Lucy started writing to the supermarkets asking them to stop selling caged eggs. And when, after a good chunk of time when she was being ignored, she started a petition on our platform, which is where we came across her. And within a couple of months of starting that petition, it grew to over 200,000 signatures. She talked about the fact that she has these rescue hens and why she cares so deeply about the issue. And at first, and she targeted the biggest retailer that were still stocking caged eggs, which is Tesco's. For the first few months, they continued to ignore her until the media caught wind, and then they were following Lucy's story, and it just wasn't going away. And so Tesco's finally had her in for a meeting, and I think they thought, like, and I'm sure some of the guys on the panel will attest to this, that sometimes decision makers can be really patronizing to young people. And I think they thought that they would flatter her into being quiet. And so they asked if she wanted to run her own food blog on the Tesco website. And she said no. And she had all of her paperwork there, and she was explaining why they needed to change their practices now. And a few weeks after that meeting, Tesco's made an announcement that they'd be discontinuing selling caged eggs. Within the 24 hours, she started another petition targeting Morrisons and Asda. And it took Morrisons and Asda a day to realize that they didn't want to feel Lucy's wrath. And so then they quickly churned out the same policy. So, I mean, that's just one example, but we've seen so many that I'd love to talk about during this panel. But yeah, we're just seeing them use the internet in a way that you couldn't have had your voice heard in this way before. So, you know, you're really harnessing the tools and the power that the internet is providing you with, and unleashing the power that young people just naturally have.
Thank you very much for that. And certainly the power of digital and electronic means is fascinates in this space, and we'll be coming more onto that later with others as well. I'd like to turn to Emily and Dom Baxter-Dola. Emily, welcome. Please do introduce yourself. And if you could share with us what led you to get you involved, what led you to get involved in youth activism and engagement? What were your personal motivations?
Hi, Corinna. Thanks so much for that introduction. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Emily. I'm currently the storytelling director at Youth for Nature, which is a global youth organization that tries to mobilize, educate, and empower young people to advocate for solutions to the climate and ecological crisis which are rooted in nature. And also, I'm part of other youth-led organizations and networks working around climate issues, both in the UK and internationally. So that's a bit about me. When it comes to what got me into youth activism and like being proud of this broader food systems movement, actually I didn't enter the climate or environmental space as a youth activist per se. It was more like as someone who is interested to advocate, but not just like from a youth perspective, but like a more general, particularly like environmental justice and climate justice perspective. It's just through being on this movement for like 2 years, 3 years now, I eventually got put into that youth activism box. And yeah, now that's how I'm primarily seen, even though some of the things that I'm more passionate about within this work are probably more related to like actual projects on the ground and like policy, but also like some advocacy as well. I think that I have always had like an interest in like climate and environmental issues since I was young in school. But I think after doing a visit to Saint Louis in Senegal, which is where I'm originally from, I realized that the impacts of climate change are already being felt. And in particular, I saw how in a village, in a rural village close to the coast, the houses and everything has been flooded because some wrong decisions have been taken around how to prevent the flood risk management in the area. And that was added up of like raising sea levels. And as people know, Senegal coasts are very threatened by climate change because of rising sea levels. But I also saw there that people that had been affected by that disaster were taking action, particularly using like agroecology and traditional ecological knowledge to like try to plant the lands that had been previously flooded and were coming like back up, and they were planting different things, and eventually at a higher stage they were able to have their own small orchards to have like organic produce, and I felt that was like so empowering in a way, because it was like, yeah, there's all these problems and issues going on, but we still have to do something about them, and it has to be like solution oriented as well. So it's not enough just to be like, oh, we have this crisis going on, okay, but what are we going to do about it, and how we can support those who are leading work around it in the end. That it was like the very thing that pushed me to actually getting involved in the climate and environmental movement, and then in the end I made my way to Youth for Nature since last year, and now working as storytelling director. So yeah, that's a bit about my background and what took me here. I hope that answers the question more or less.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you for that. And now I'd like to move to Tasha Mhakayakora. Can you tell us a bit about introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this space?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction, Corinna. So my name is Tasha Mhakay, and I am a youth activist at an organization called Bite Back. Essentially, we are a youth-led movement that wants to transform the food environment to make sure that it puts the health of young people at the forefront of its operations. And we hope to do that by revealing the truth about how the food system is designed, but also look at ways that we can redesign it to put young people's health first. In doing that, we also hope to build powerful alliances with businesses, governments, schools, parents, carers, anybody else who can help us to make that redesign a reality. And how I got involved in youth activism and engagement, I fell into it by accident, actually. So throughout secondary school and college, I was always that child who was outspoken about so many different issues. I was always asking questions, always questioning authority, always asking why. In essence, I was like a woke kid from a very young age. And it's this passion and curiosity and boldness that essentially allowed me to be an avid debater throughout my whole academic experience. And that is when I came across Bite Back, and I found out that Jamie Oliver, who's our co-founder, was looking for a group of young people to form the youth board. And my first form of activism kind of happened at the age of 14. At the time, I was, aspiring to be a doctor, and I was looking for work experience, and I was able to find work experience with the Director of Public Health in my local borough. Through that experience, I was able to get my secondary school at the time to sign up to the Sugar Smart Pledge. Essentially, the Sugar Smart campaign asks for organizations, schools, businesses to raise awareness around issues concerning consuming too much sugar, and to kind of create a food environment that makes it easier for people to make healthier options and consume less sugar. And I think the main thing that drives me into youth activism is, quite frankly, I was sick and tired of adults having conversations about young people's issues, and not a single person is present in that conversation. So it's that lack of representation that kind of fueled my desire to make sure that not only my voice, but the voices of other young people are heard and are amplified. And it's not a case of, we're just making noise in the background, but these views are valued and are taken into account when we're looking at decision-making processes as well. And why personally I'm passionate or motivated about, any childhood obesity strategies, any activism trying to solve that, is because a lot of childhood obesity, it disproportionately affects children and young people like myself. We know that the prevalence of childhood obesity is significantly higher among ethnic minority children, particularly Black children. Studies have found that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, those that live in deprived areas, are also likely to have an increased likelihood of obesity. And all of these factors, I always think I'm one of those. I'm one of that person. I am that Black child. I came from a deprived background. Why is it that why is it that I'm not one of those, 1 in 3 children that left primary school overweight or obese? And so are these health disparities that affect not just my peers, but my friends, my family, all of that kind of fueled my activism in trying to make a change and making sure that the next generation doesn't experience what we're experiencing. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, Corinna.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tasha, and welcome. I'd like to now move to Amanda Namayi. Amanda, please do introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you get involved with youth activism and some of your personal motivations.
Thank you, Corinna, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're from. My name is Amanda Namayi. I come from Kenya, and I wear several hats in youth involvement in agriculture space. I am Go-Getters Lead at Generation Africa, which is a thematic platform of the Africa Green Revolution Forum that deals with youth in agriculture. I'm also part of the team reporting on the effects of COVID-19 on Africa's food system, and also a board member of the Global Alliance for Youth for Zero Hunger. And my story or my journey in agriculture started when I was a little child, but I did not know of it. So my father is a farmer, but for a very long time, I did not know what he used to do because my mother was formally employed. And as a child back then, we had a school diary and the front page had the contact details of your parents. So my mother could easily be traced because she had an office building, office cell phone, extension number, you could track her. But my dad, when it came to the details of my dad, it always used to be left blank. So as a child then, I always used to wonder, what does my father do? And where I'm from, like in Africa, it's not a profession of prestige. So it's not something that one would wear on their badge. My educational background is in IT, information technology, because the quintessential story, you want your child to have a better, brighter future. And it is perceived that it's much brighter anywhere else apart from agriculture. So as destiny would have it, my first assignment involved developing a system for agricultural loans. And what did that entail? It entailed me going to the farms. And when I left for about a year, I was out in the fields. And I totally loved the experience. And from that, it just reminded me of my childhood where I would really enjoy spending time with my dad. And I knew right there and then that I don't think I should be coding. I want to be more on the fields. I was just intrigued. I just wanted to know more. And more specifically about youth in agriculture is I used to find myself sticking out like a sore thumb because I'd be the youngest. And that's how naturally, my journey in youth activism, as we call it, began. Emily mentioned that, she wasn't particularly looking to be an activist. It so happened that no one else was talking about agriculture. And that was my case too. So when I start writing and just telling stories about farmers and people would wonder why agriculture? Why are you talking about agriculture? You're so young. And then it begs the question, why not? And especially because I'm young, so why not? Because it's seen as a retirement plan, a last mile resort. And so the more I just kept writing about it, reading up on it, getting intrigued by the stories, going to the farms, the more the interest sparks, and even just having a look at policy guidelines that, led to me getting involved in the youth involvement processes at the CFS, Committee on World Food Security. And that's how I've ended up doing what I'm doing here as a matter of passion. Yes, so that's my story.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. Brilliant to have you with us. We're all honored to have you with us. I'd now like to ask Mafalda. Please, Mafalda, tell us, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what led you to get involved in youth activism, in this case in Co-Create.
So hi, my name is Mafalda. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Mafalda Gonçalves. I'm 18 years old and I'm from Lisbon, Portugal. Pedro and I are in the same project. We have the same last name, but we are not related. I'm just, as I said, I'm a member of the Co-Create task force. That is a group designed to build a declaration to fight against child obesity. We have written 4 demands that it's based on different opinions from different teams all around Europe. And now we are starting to see the results of that declaration. So I started to get involved in this type of projects because since a very young age, I always felt the need to make a difference, to be more to my society and my community. When I was first introduced to the Co-Create project, I thought it was a really nice idea, and it was a topic really interesting, and that should have youth behind it to try to solve this problem. So I started in the Portuguese Alliance, and then they asked Pedro and I and other of our colleagues if we wanted to join the task force. And I said yes, because I thought it would be a very interesting and unique experience to get to know different perspectives from different teams with different backgrounds of mine. And now we have written our declaration, and I'm very glad I joined the task force, and I hope you get to see the declaration. It's available on the internet. So I think this is my background. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mafalda. Wonderful to have you with us. And now over to you, Pedro.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pedro Gonçalves. I'm 18 years old and I'm from Portugal as well. My background story is very similar to Mafalda's one, so I'll be focusing on my personal motivation. As Mafalda said, we're scouts. They approached us and we started working at the Portuguese Alliance, and then they invited us to be part of this task force. And the more I worked about these subjects, the more I wanted to be a part of this change and wanted to learn more. It started bit by bit. It started in the Alliance, and then it went to the task force and we wrote the declaration. And at first I was just giving my opinions, my ideas, what do you think? And then we were developing a declaration to change in a more real way the things we were talking about in the Alliance in the first place. So as I was getting more involved in this project, I felt like my voice was really being heard, and I couldn't throw that away because if I'm being given the opportunity to talk, I can't waste that opportunity. So of course I said yes to the invitation to talk, to be in the declaration, the task force, and the invitation to be here today. So thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you, Pedro, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us along with the other panelists. And now I'd like to move to you, Ben. Ben Ebbrell, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what led you to get involved in this space.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Ben Ebbrell, so one of the co-founders at SORTEDfood. I can see already there's loads of questions coming in, so I'll keep this short and sweet. But essentially, Sorted is one of the world's leading sort of food and cooking communities, and it's a space online with foodies from all over the planet who essentially have a conversation online. So it's more centered around lifting spirits and entertainment and inspiration, but there's definitely an element of the ability to change habits and opinions around food through that. It's a journey that's sort of, we've been on for 10 years. It began when we were students, and we've kind of grown up and matured across many years, but the same sentiments around food sit at the heart of everything we do. And the food world has changed a lot in that time, and there's a lot of focus that's changed around what matters in the food world. So our job really is to sit at the center of this bubbling conversation online and conduct and curate and work out what's next. And for us, although not as young as many of the people on the panel, our audience is really the core here. It's Sorted is not about those of us you see on screen. It's about this global community that we interact with across social media. And we think that's really important because it's those voices that have the real power to make a difference and real change in the future of food.
Great, thank you so much, Ben, and welcome to you all. It's fabulous to have you. So there's a question from Dan here, and Dan says he works in the food NGO sector, and he says, how can the NGOs who work in food, how can they effectively bring the voices of young people to drive change? So these are NGOs that are run by adults, they already exist. How can they engage with young people and make sure the voices of those young people are heard in a meaningful and empowering way rather than a tokenistic way? So Ben, you work at SORTEDfood, you're not working with an NGO, but what advice would you give to an NGO who wants to give a voice to young people in order to drive positive change in a meaningful way?
I think actually it's something we've seen probably more so in the last year with everything that's been going on, more so than ever before. But if you look at what is happening, we're seeing this huge divide between big multinational corporations, politics, science, basically the experts who have the background knowledge and the experience. They sit on sort of one side. And then there's this huge chasm in the middle where you've got a whole digital generation, a whole group of people who, I mean, Tasha said it earlier that she was very outspoken when she was younger. I think so much of a digital generation is, and they're very outspoken, but they are in a different world almost. They sit online, and social media is really where they absolutely love to sort of thrive and have that conversation. And we kind of sit in that bubble too. The problem is these two worlds are so separate, and there's this massive chasm in between. And the only way I think you can begin to bridge that is just to have very open and transparent conversations, because at the moment there's a huge amount of mistrust between what is published, and I think we've all become armchair experts because we've all got a wealth of knowledge at our fingertips, but it's not necessarily all to be trusted. So it's almost like, how do you find your way to find the information that works and trust? And I think the way that NGOs and the big sort of multinational corporations and politics and policymakers can really listen is to actually take part in those conversations on those platforms. So rather than almost looking down, it's like joining. We always say at Sorted Food started as a conversation around a pub table. And what we always say is, like, come and join us at the pub table. Come and have a seat here with us, because when we're all in the same room together, we can actually have conversations rather than dipping in and out and having various conversations on platforms and thinking you're doing your part. You've really got to sit down at that table and have a very open, very transparent conversation and actively listen as much as preach or teach.
Thanks, Ben. And Tasha, Ben just mentioned what you'd said in your earlier remarks there, and was talking about the importance of a shared conversation around a table, as it were, but in a digital space. And that's a way that food NGOs can work to give young people a voice. Does that resonate with you? Is that something you'd also recommend?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the time the conversations that, you know, we have on different issues among young people is literally with your friends, with your family, with your peers. It's at school, and it's not where it's supposed to be, where the change is at. So definitely bridging that gap between the NGOs and young people, having open and transparent conversations, and really bringing us and making us feel like, you know, we're involved. A lot of the time I've been involved in organizations where my participation feels like a tick box exercise. It's almost, you know, tokenistic, and you can feel it. So, you know, when you're invited onto events and panels and meetings, etc., and you're really a prominent part of the decision-making processes, you can feel that as a young person, and you're likely to also tell your peers to get involved, and that ultimately builds momentum and a movement. So I definitely think the beginning of it is conversation and trying to bridge that gap between the two.
Thanks, Tasha. We got a question here from Andrea, and she says, considering there's so much burden on the next generation now, what do you think is the most pressing action that those in power should take in order to, I guess what you're saying, Andrea, is to say the most pressing action that those in power should take today in order to support the lives of young people and to enable the concerns of young people to come through. What should the adults do? What should those who have power do? Kajal, can I ask you if you have a reflection in response to that question?
Yeah, and I think it's slightly connected to your previous question as well about how charities can really be listening to young people and involving them. I think I came from the charity sector before, so Change.org is a social enterprise, it's a tech platform, but I came from the charity sector, and I think that there is still a real resistance to let go of control from the sector. And what that means is that I think charities can often be frightened of involving the people that they're working for right in the heart of the work that they do, because they are worried that, you know, they're just worried of letting go of control. And I think that there isn't a real belief at the heart that they are the experts. And so I think that there needs to be, like, I truly, you know, having experienced and worked with young people and just seeing how powerful they are, and actually seeing the impact of when adults get involved, how they can actually really dampen down the voice of young people, and the fact that then lessens the impact that they can have. I really believe that they, you know, that they need to be at the heart of the work. But I think that there's like a lack of belief right now, that young people really do have power and have experience that's worth sharing and being in charge of. We worked with a charity recently where a young person was the petition starter, and the petition got really, really big. And you know, as a rule, we really insist on, we won't work with a charity if they want a case study to be the representation of the petition. It has to be someone with a lived experience who's truly part of the partnership. They're not just a case study. And so when the petition became really big, they were worried about that person becoming trolled. And all the adults were having this conversation about this worry that this young person was going to be trolled. And we were like, well, has anyone asked the young person? Like, what do they think? And so I think there's a real, just like it's like I guess it's patronizing and not really seeing them as a true voice that's on the level playing field. And so that's what needs to change, really. I think an attitude shift. And I think we started seeing that. I think the youth climate movement last year really has started shifting some of that. It's, you know, it's a long journey. I think young people have been trying to kind of, you know, be taken seriously for a long time, and that's, I think that's really key.
Great, yeah, thanks very much. Really interesting answer there. And Gavin has a question about, which is relevant to this, I think, about stereotypes, about the way that we might assume young people, youth are going to behave, or what they need to support them, or whatever. Emily, could you share with us what you think some of the stereotypes young people face when trying to create change?
That's a good question, and also it hits a bit very close home. I think the stereotypes really vary depending on who shares them, but a lot of times there's first assumption that young people don't really know, like, the facts or the science or like the policy or like the raw data about the issues they're talking about, and they are just there to like give like heartwarming messages, like inspirational quotes for leaders to have, and not really like, they are there to speak and to give nice speeches, but when it comes to the actual policy work or like project implementation, that's not something they want to do or they cannot do because they are like really young or like they don't have experience. So I think that's one. It's like young people are mainly seen as spokespersons for causes, but never really seen as actual like experts or like leaders or like project managers and other things in the work they do. I think other like a stereotype that young people may have is, particularly in the climate movement, is that we don't understand really what is going on, like because we are young in theory, supposedly. We are not living like in the real world in which we know exactly like the issues that are happening. So for example, with the climate change, and when there has been like the climate marches last year, there was sometimes commentary from politicians and like in social media and so on, how misguided the young people are there, and how they should be at the school studying and not like they don't know what they're talking about. They are still school children, they're young people. Or like also talking about, well, the problem is like young people's fault because this generation, like millennials or Generation Z, they love smartphones, they love consuming things, so they are part of the problem more than us. Like this generation is like the bad one. They are very individualistic and so on. So all those stereotypes about the generation, like young people that are exist in society in general, really get accentuated during climate and environmental conversations. And I think this often what happens is that young people face many doors being shut in front of them, and just being reduced to like something that, oh, well, we have to listen to them because they're nice speakers and that's it, but never take very seriously, or like never take on board for like decisions or like for policy or project implementation. And I think that's really, really frustrating in many ways, because it paints young people in a way in which it kind of disempowers. So a lot of people speak about how can we empower young people to like speak up, to like be involved and be engaged in work. But a lot of times you will find that, you know, like young people need to be empowered, but often it is like the structures and the established organizations which like disempower us, or like blocks us, or like get us out of those spaces to make decisions because of these stereotypes and other norms, which are rooted in intergenerational injustice. So I think, yeah, we need to have probably a reframing this conversation around youth engagement in like food systems and like in wider issues, because the way in which you talk about it sometimes reproduces these issues in which young people are seen as like the ones who have to be engaged and empowered, but sometimes it's about those who have the lock to the keys to different locks. Are they willing to open them? That's another conversation to be had. So yeah, that's what I think.
Wow, I learned a lot from that, Emily. Thanks for sharing that. A lot there, and quite a long list of stereotypes that clearly need to be broken down. Mafalda, you're 18. Does any of that resonate with you? You work in obesity and co-create a different part of the food system. Have you faced any of those stereotypes? And Catherine asks, how can we facilitate situations where young people who may face these stereotypes can be heard and ensure that they're not shut down?
So I relate to everything that Emily says. One of the things that have been more common in my work as a member of the co-create and as a member of the youth engagement, I've been always told, oh my God, that's so cute. You have interest in other things that are not school, or I don't know, practicing a sport or hanging out with your friends. And we sometimes we just want to be heard. We just want to be taken serious from the start. We have ideas, and we just need that adults give us a platform to speak out that those ideas that we collect from our daily experiences and from our different backgrounds. And I think that one of the main things that adults should do is really that, is giving us a platform and say now you have the floor to talk. We are not going to interrupt you. We are not going to be mad about what you say. We just want to hear your honest opinion. So I think this is the most important thing that sometimes is not used. And as a young people working in this kind of projects, I think it's very important.
Great, thanks, Mafalda. I have to admit, I haven't been so nervous in a long time in sharing an event as this evening, because I'm aware of the extent of the learning that I have as a individual and a professional in this space, in this area. I'm concerned I got so much to learn that I myself will end up saying too much and not giving you enough of a voice. So I'm trying my best. Amanda, there's a question here. If we go to some more specifics now, there's a question here about the power of global connections around youth. You're from Kenya, and you engage in the World Committee on Food Security, in the youth movement around zero hunger. You're involved in some global movements. Abby has a question around a project kicking off in Glasgow in Scotland next year, a low carbon food city. And she wants to inspire young people to take action on climate change, but using the power of global connections to inspire youth. So can you share with us your experience of a global youth engagement and how that can help build momentum to food systems change?
Yes, I'll gladly share my experience, especially working with youth from around the world. First and foremost, it broadens perspectives. Case in point, I've heard a lot of discussion on, nutrition with the specific focus on obesity. Now, from my country, or even in the continent of Africa, obesity is not a challenge that we face. We actually face more of starvation. So it broadens your perspective and also helps you understand the food challenges from around the world, not just your own, and to get to understand exactly how you can help as an individual, and also as a youth network and a youth movement. Then I'll talk specifically about the Youth Alliance for Zero Hunger, and how the collective voice was able to move. Last year, during the 46th session of the CFS, which is an acronym for World Committee on Food Security, we had the first ever youth-led panel session, and the reason why we even got that audience is because, look, we are youth from all over the world, and this is the apex body for all matters concerning food-related policy. So if you want to involve the youth, and you say you want to discuss youth initiatives, Ben had alluded to that. Like, we don't want to be discussed. We want to sit at the table. We want to actually tell you exactly what's happening on the ground, and the alliance is made up of youth along and across the value chain in different sectors, from fisheries, from dairy, from food production, aggregators, transport and logistics, ag tech, fintech, you name it. And that wholesome perspective that it brought to the CFS was very, very enriching, because you get to hear on nutrition perspectives from a starvation point of view, nutrition perspective from the obesity point of view, you see, and we look at the missing middle of teenage or rather young adults, because more like there's a lot of focus on, the infants, nursing mothers, young children up 1,000 days, and then we also have focus on the elderly, but we are also not looking at, the missing middle of undernutrition for young adults who are indulgent in fast food and low nutritious food. So it really, really broadens your perspective and also gives you the gravitas to actually speak up and tell the policymakers or the policy influencers that, look, we have a global backing, and if you want insights on what's happening from around the world, then you need to listen to us, because we bring that insight from across the globe, and that has really helped. And for COP26, I believe that would be a great approach, to have the world listen and actually pay attention to you.
Thanks for that, Amanda. Powerful stuff. Pedro, if I could move to you, there's a question from Sophia here, and she said, I'd love to hear examples of what initiatives or programs that you've participated in that you felt involved young people in a strong way and improved their level of ownership. It seemed to me from what you said before that you felt the Co-Create initiative that you're involved with is something that you've been involved with in a strong way, and that you have ownership, feel an ownership over. I hope I'm correct in my interpretation of that, but perhaps you could tell us a bit about how you think the initiative you're involved with, Co-Create, why it is that you have felt meaningfully involved in that and felt a level of ownership in that initiative.
Yes, thank you. I started working with the Co-Create project last year, so I think I don't have a lot of experiences or projects that I worked on, but when I was listening to the question, I remember of basically every meeting of the Co-Create Task Force, because we were discussing topics that matter to us, and we were being listened to. And one of the meetings that I remember the most happened a few weeks ago, and we had finished our declaration, and we were adopting it. And we have were a lot of people from the different alliances, and people from the Co-Create project itself, and I felt really proud of our work in a way that I didn't feel when I was writing it. So I think that these kinds of meetings, these kinds of presentations, projects are the things that give us the voice, and that makes us feel heard.
Great, thank you, Pedro. Brilliant, fascinating. Kajal, can I ask Heather's question to you? She asks about how to engage with young people who aren't typically heard. So that might be people who experience deprivation, challenges, marginalization of some type. How do you make sure that digital platforms are inclusive of those voices which might be more marginalized because of inequalities in society?
Yeah, I mean, it's my background. I come from a working class background with immigrant parents, and one of the reasons that I think I was drawn to digital activism is because it helped empower voices that I didn't see when I was growing up. The types of people that we see actually use our platforms really successfully tend to be the more marginalized voices in society, because they have those barriers placed in the real world. And so they're often turning online to speak up, and you know, those voices are being amplified. I think then on top of that, there are other barriers. I mean, the other thing I'd say is that so for example, another way that these platforms are just really helping you know, those kind of marginal groups is that for people who with disabilities, so young people with disabilities, it's a lot harder for their voices to be heard, and for them to get access to, you know, to kind of traditional meetings, protests, those kinds of spaces, and so their work online actually it matters more. It's more important. I'd say that one of the things that needs to, you know, the way that we support those voices is that when organizations or people are working with more marginal groups, there just needs to be a little bit more support in place. So, you know, guidance, the team that my team at change.org, we're kind of part campaigners, part give pastoral care to the people that we work with. And so that's, you know, things like reassuring and giving the confidence to somebody who hasn't traditionally been heard that their voice and their story matters, but then also just giving guidance about how to stay safe online. There are so many different ways of dealing with trolls, for example. There's no one size fits all. And then how to just deal with, once your story's out there, how to deal with it, because it can be twisted, it can be used in the media, it can be exploited. And so how to be, you know, stay safe in that way and make sure that your story stays your own. So yeah, I mean, I hope that, I mean, I wonder if other people on the panel have just direct experience of speaking, you know, being able to offer advice about how they've been supported.
Would anyone else like to add to that?
Maybe I can add a bit. Myself as well. I come from like a working class and a migrant background, and also like ethnic minority. I'm Black, and I think that for me, oftentimes, particularly in the climate movement and environmental movement, a lot of times the main issues or the main points of advocacy don't necessarily reflect the concerns of those who are from like more working class, from like communities or ethnic minorities. And sometimes people try to be reactive. So then they are like, oh, we have this movement, but we don't have enough diversity. So let's try to reach out to people and include them. But what they don't realize that when they were building that movement, they already excluded those people from different backgrounds. And now they're trying to diversify, but diversity is not a solution. And it's not enough to add people to your movement just to diversify. You actually have to address their concerns and their challenges. I think that sometimes organizations and movements are not able to do that because when they are building and growing as an organization, they don't actually include those concerns or like those issues within their work when they are growing and where they're like building and creating themselves. And I think that that's been really important to reflect on in my role in Youth for Nature, because luckily, well, I also challenged the organization started last year, and I had the privilege to be able to help set the foundation for that. And to this day now, we're still building programs, and every time I'm trying to build a program along the way, something that I do a lot, even if it might seem time consuming, is always trying to reach out to as many different people we have in our organization from different backgrounds to see what they think, if this is working. I always try to think, okay, but what support would youth need to be able to do this? And being open, and I was asking that in forums and in feedback and everything, always having that openness to discuss these issues, or people that people bring their identity and like reality and experiences onto their work, even if it's like on food or like climate or environmental issues or health, is very important. So having that space and making that space integral of your initiatives when you are making them is the best way forward in order to be able to really engage in a productive way with those from like more disadvantaged or maybe like disenfranchised communities. And that's how I love what I am in Youth for Nature, because Youth for Nature allowed me to be that and to be there and gave me that space from the beginning to co-create it in a way. So I think, yes, a bit of my experience.
Thanks, Emily. Anyone else would like to add anything then? Okay, well, I'd like to ask, go back to Ben actually, to ask you a question from Usman, who says, do you think there's a potential for young people to develop startup food businesses that offer alternatives and solutions to the mainstream food system, such as providing food, reduced environmental footprint, reduced waste? We already heard from Amanda about her passion about youth engagement in agriculture. How about young people actually getting involved by starting up food businesses? Ben?
I think that is one very, very sound and solid route. And I think the reason being that young people generally think in different ways. I think a lot of the sort of the older, arguably more experienced, but in big corporations and with previous experience, they're already sat on the train tracks of this is how it has to be done. I think David mentioned it right at the start about challenging conventional wisdom. Young people can come in and it's blue sky thinking, and they look at it going, why is it being done that way? To some extent, that's how Sorted started a decade ago, and 10 years is a long time. You can be even quicker now. But it was us looking, going, that's how they produce TV cookery, and it's lots and lots of people involved and lots of process, and wouldn't it be better to connect to more people and hear more genuine conversation from the people that matter, the people who are watching, engaging with the content, by just doing it a bit more raw, a bit more kind of, the production values were lower, but it was quicker and it was more agile. And I think that's what startups absolutely can do. Not only will a young audience be more, or a young startup be more in tune with how to promote and market the messages that are important to them, because social media is second nature, rather than older generations who end up going through marketing agencies and stuff like that. I think a young generation, we always talk about the thumb generation, and that is the fact that young people make more decisions with their thumbs every single day than they do, and that has more of an impact on smart devices and social media than their other four limbs combined. And it's the ability to be quick and agile and connected to the whole world and all of the voices around the world, and all of the different opinions. That, I think, puts people in the perfect position to start up food businesses, much more so than an older generation who are already sort of chained to the way they've always done it. Challenge the wisdom, because just because it's been done that way doesn't mean it always has to be. Yeah,
very good points there. Thanks, Ben. Tasha, if I can go over to you about a question that we've got here from Sophia, and perhaps if you want to pick up any of the other questions that have been raised as well, if you had something you'd like to add. But you work on the health aspects of the food system, mainly. That's what your initiative is about. I'm sure you've got other broader concerns as well. But we know that young people are and this has come out before, are sensitive to the influences of the system of marketing, for example. And young people might eat a lot of fast food, for example. So they're sort of sensitive to the diet culture out there. Sophia wants to know, how do you think we could promote health? How do you think youth can promote health, while also being aware of the damaging effects of the culture that is affecting them? I don't know whether I've explained that very well, but hopefully you get the point. Tasha.
Yeah, no, you explained that perfectly fine. I think to Sophia's response, I think first thing is understanding how obesity is such a multifaceted issue, especially when we're talking about childhood obesity. There's so many factors that play into why young people are more likely to consume junk food, and the impacts of, you know, junk food advertising on social media, on TV, etc., etc. And so first of all, my thing is to make sure that we make this knowledge really understandable and easily accessible to young people. I was saying in the comment section that a lot of the knowledge that I have about food activism and health disparities hasn't come out of school and being taught by my teachers, etc. But it's come out of conversations that I've had with, you know, adults, that I've had with other young people who are just as passionate about what I'm talking about. And a lot of it is not, you know, scientific knowledge. A lot of it is just experiences. You know, when I turned pescatarian about 8 years ago, that's when I realized that my junk food had 5, you know, fast food shops, all of them offering the same thing for the same price, 6 beans and chips at £2. And I was like, wait, now I realize that there isn't a lot of options for young people, especially if you have dietary requirements or you're just trying to eat healthier. So I think making that kind of knowledge and resources accessible to young people plays a really big part in that. And I also wanted to add on to Ben's point earlier about, you know, is there space for young people to come up and create their own startup businesses in the food industry? And I definitely think there is. I just question if the adults in the room are ready to receive it. You know, one of my inspirations, and I put that in the chat as well, is Omari McQueen. He's an 11-year-old boy. He started his own vegan restaurant, started an online food shop, and has won multiple awards for his vegan recipes. And he's 11. For me, that makes me think, what have I been doing for the last 20 years of my life? What's that? But that just shows how the young people are and children are very much capable of doing what adults can do. It's just whether adults are ready to receive it and take it on board. And even if they aren't, quite frankly, it's going to happen anyway.
So thank you, Tasha. Great stuff. Amanda, Charlene's got a question here, and she says, is there anything obvious that you feel that policymakers, you've engaged with the policy community, is there anything obvious that you feel that policymakers or politicians just aren't getting it when it comes to the food system and improving the food system? Like, for example, the work that you've done on climate and agriculture. Is there anything that youth get this, but the policymaker adults in power, they just don't get it? But we do, because we've had we're wide. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, the last part of your question wasn't so clear.
Yeah, sorry, it was interrupted. Yeah, so are there things that you think of that when you encounter policymakers or practitioners who are much older than you, that they just don't get it about what we need to do to improve food systems? Whereas younger people do get it. They understand that certain things need to change, and that you wonder why the older generation is really being so stupid not to understand that.
Okay. Yes. So there is a chasm, as Ben said, a wide gaping chasm between policymakers and the youth. So first of all, I'll take you to the African context. So we look at the social stratification. So most of the policymakers are, far from the ground, literally and figuratively. So the youth are literally experiencing the effects of climate, they're experiencing the effects of unsafe food, and they're tired, and they want to change, and especially when it comes to punitive policies that make it extremely hard for those in food production to actually earn a decent income. And that's why, like in the African context, more often than not, agriculture or food production is seen as a poor man's job, because it gets extremely hard to earn a decent living from food production. And thus the high and lofty, so it seems, are very detached from the needs and actual because as young people, we are the wearer of the shoe, and only the wearer of the shoe knows where it pinches. And it seems so far-fetched, like, don't you feel the pain that we're feeling? Don't you know that we are the ones who are actually bearing the brunt of your ill-formed policies? So I think that chasm comes more so because they don't feel the heat. When we look at the disruption in the food supply chain, most of the people who are affected, our policymakers apparently were not. So because they're well cushioned in society, and it hit mostly the lower middle class and the low income earners, who are greatly affected by the pandemic and the disruptions that it brought to the food chain. And even before the COVID pandemic hit, the various challenges plaguing the agriculture sector, fluctuations in prices that either be market glut and then the prices are low, and then we are also challenged by erratic weather, the effects of climate change. So all these effects are not being borne by them, or rather they're not feeling it as much as the young people are. And we are looking at the trajectory, the deforestation, and the rate at which things are going. And now we're standing up to say, hey, look, you need to stop doing this. You need to stop doing this and actually think about the effects of your actions on our future.
Very powerfully said. Thank you, Amanda. I mean, I think there's a lot of what you said, which is about educating others. But there's two questions here from educators, Sophia and Kim, and they both ask about how, well, Sophia asks, and Mafalda, perhaps I can start with you on this one, she's an educator, and she says she wants to develop leadership capabilities among her students to help them become citizens in their food-related decisions. So as an educator, she wants to know what kind of messages would you, as a young leader, want to receive from adults that could help, I don't know, how, to help educate, I suppose, to help expose, to help inform, so that you feel more empowered to affect change.
Okay, so I think that, thank you for the question. I think that these kind of projects don't usually tend to be, how can I say this? They are not accessible to everyone. So for instance, I entered Co-Create because I was a scout, and they asked our group if they wanted to become a part of the Co-Create. So I think that one of the most important things is to inform young people, and to let them see that there are a lot of projects that are open to them and to their opinions, and that they feel that is a safe place to share their life experience and contribute with their values, and as I say, their view of their background. So I think that that is one of the most important things, to inform young people. I also think that maybe trying to organize debates to get people more comfortable to share and to talk, because sometimes in these projects people really want to give their ideas, but they are insecure about if they are talking right or wrong. Sometimes they are out of their comfort zone. For instance, this is not my native language, so for instance sometimes I feel like am I going right, wrong? So I think that trying to also to practice this kind of speech is also important, and make them feel always appreciated for their opinions, and and tell them that their skills and their characteristics, their different backgrounds, it's always a win, and it's never a loss. And I think that is the main I think that is my advice.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mafalda. Really, really useful. Kajal, can I come back to you with a question from Florence? And she says, what practical tools and platforms have you found to be useful to your work in food systems transformation? So you haven't been working in food systems transformation specifically, but you've been hearing from the other panel about their work in food. So what advice would you have for the food systems community about practical tools and platforms that could be used by youth towards this goal?
Yeah, I guess my advice for changing anything is it's not really a practical tool, but rather a tactic or method. Is I think the best way to change hearts and minds is through storytelling. And I think that is the case whether you're doing really nerdy policy, or you're doing, you're trying to kind of get the media involved in an issue, or a politician involved, is good storytelling. And I don't think that the public really realizes that enough, and people don't realize enough how powerful and valuable their own experiences are. So we often, when we spoke to Lucy, who I spoke about at the start of the panel, who campaigned to make Tesco's stop selling caged eggs, initially she didn't really talk about the fact that she owns these welfare rescued hens, and she just mentioned it in a call, and we were like, oh my God, you need to tell that story. You need to explain why you care about this issue. And the reason I say that is because there's data that says that people won't remember statistics, but they'll remember stories. You'll always remember how a person made you feel, rather than really, the kind of the details of what they said. And so, and that is the case, I think, especially when it comes to something that can be a bit more technical, and when you're trying to mobilize more people to join your cause. I think that, something like, food campaigning, it's not the sexiest issue out there. There are so many kind of things that are of vogue and trendy, but anything can be made engaging through really, really good storytelling. And there's like a whole art to this, like creating heroes and villains, and making sure that your narrative has a protagonist, and that when you're speaking to your audience, how are they involved in this story, and what's the drama that they're engaging in. So there's tons of stuff out there online actually about how storytelling can help in your activism.
Great, it's a great point. And Emily, you're the storytelling director in your organization. And Mary had a question about, if you have to invest their energies in one part of the food system, where do you think the energy would be best used? Well, perhaps telling stories is one place to allocate energy. Emily, could you share your experiences of storytelling and its power?
Yeah, I was just typing actually on the chat about this, but it's great to have now the ability to speak. in Youth for Nature, we see storytelling as a powerful, very powerful tool for change, in the sense that it can help young people to reflect, communicate, and mobilize around the issues they care about, and also at the same time share learnings and share reflections on their work on the ground. So we try not only to messaging, but also to solutions, so young people can use storytelling to communicate their projects and their activities on the ground and reflect on the challenges and learnings they have had. And they can pass that knowledge on to other young people looking to run their own organizations or looking for support or more knowledge on how to address the work they are doing on the ground. And I think that when it comes to food systems and thinking about which is the key part of the food system to focus on, I think normally what we say for nature, or myself particularly when I do my work or my research, I always try to look at food systems from a systemic perspective. So I wouldn't be able to tell you this is the sector we have to focus on, this is the part we have to focus on, because for me it's systemic, even though I do tend to pay more attention to the food production issues. I think that young people there can play a very important role because particularly in many countries, there is this perception that young people are not interested in agriculture and they're living rural communities. I think Amanda touched a bit on that issues from perspective from Africa. And I think that sometimes people don't realize it's not a matter of interest, but it can be a matter of resources. And I think that food production and food systems in general, sometimes it's not people are not necessarily paid the best, or they're not paid at all, or there's people who carry out food activities not because they're looking for profit, but maybe because it's for subsistence. So the food system is a very interesting part to look at, particularly when it comes to production. And young people can play a role in that because they can come up with different ideas and approaches to developing and to producing and to distributing food, which they are doing in their communities already, which are more equitable and more climate resilient, and also lessen impacts on climate change emissions. And I think that through storytelling, as a Youth for Nature, we have been able to share those successful stories and reflect. And now we are looking at how can we better provide support and resources like grants to scale up that work. I think that's the power of storytelling. It's not just in sharing the story and sharing a message, but it's also reflecting action that you want to see scale up and inspire others to take similar action. And also people can hear out your story and say, oh, I want to support you better. I want to actively help to make that work great. I think storytelling can really be a very powerful tool for that whole chain approach to change on a more wider scale.
Great, thank you, Emily. And also about how to engage youth, bring other youth into it. So Ben, we've had a couple of questions here. We've gone incredibly fast. We've only got 5 minutes left. But there's a couple of questions come in about youth who want to engage and still feel a little bit outside all of this, but might be sitting in this event tonight or sitting out there in the world thinking, I'd love to get involved, but I'm not really sure where to start. What would your advice be, Ben? Where is the starting point? What's the best thing that they can do to start to get involved in this?
I think what I'm about to say probably echoes what a lot of people have said, and a lot of it boils down to confidence, and actually seeking out events where not only are you allowed to have an opinion and a voice, but actually your opinion and your voice is probably as important, if not more important, than the people who are hosting the event, because there is this cycle that carries on, and if you don't break that cycle and bring in the young and the youthful opinions, then it really doesn't matter. So many decisions are based, especially in policy, and rightly so, because you have to be able to support it, but so many are based on data, and data is always going to be historic, the very nature of what it is. What you really want to do is tap into the opinions and attitudes of people who are thinking forward. What do I want to see? What actually matters to me, and what's looking forward? So your opinions of what you want to see change and what truly matters are so crucial to any conversation. All you've got to do is seek out those events, and actually sometimes virtual events are an easier way of doing it, because there are always going to be restrictions on travel and cost and budgets and funding to travel to other events. Actually, maybe virtual events like this are a great kind of springboard to be able to start sharing opinions through chat. You don't have to be invited to be on a panel to be engaged and have opinions in chat and conversation. And actually, I think we've seen this year virtual events provide more opportunity than ever, because it's a space online that I think we're all a bit more comfortable with as a youthful audience.
Great, thanks, Ben. Well, I'm going to have to bring the evening to a close now. As I said, it's gone incredibly fast. But we've got a couple of questions here from Jess and Dan about the future. That what would you like to see in 5-10 years' time? What would you like to see happen so that youth can have more of young people, youth can have more of a voice, can feel more empowered in affecting in change, and can get their voices out there? What's going to make that happen? What would you really like to see happen in the next 5 years? Ben, I'll start with you and then go around. If you could just say something very top line, a couple of sentences.
Yeah, I think ultimately appetites always are going to shape the future. So it is what the consumers want that is going to change what is grown, how it's produced, how it's retailed, because ultimately that's where things make a difference. So I think what I'd love to see, and I think we've seen it this year, people are more connected to food than ever before, because while our lives have been put on pause, I think food obviously remains and we can be very connected to food. But what I'd love to see in the years to come is that bridge between the two worlds be more and more connected, so that we can understand more about the appetites of what a whole youthful generation actually want to see. Because if we hear about it and make note of it and allow those voices to shape the future, then it can. The problem at the moment is that still too separated. And I honestly hope that if we can get more events like this, and I think it's a brilliant starting place to just have more conversations, because you don't have to have all the answers, but at least if you don't have all the answers, you might be able to work out which questions to ask.
Great, thanks, Ben. So Pedro, what would you like to see happen in the next 5-10 years time to continue to give and to continue to harness the power of youth in affecting change?
What I'd like to see is all of these projects succeed and our demands being adopted. And what I think we should do, and in order to have this project succeeded, is to actually listen to young people, listen to these speakers, and have a voice. Use our voice, and I think that's it.
Good answer, Pedro. And Mafalda, what would be your response to that question?
I agree with everything that was said. I hope that in the future we see more young people involved in this kind of projects, and for that we need to show young people that these projects have results. So I hope to see that this, for instance, that Co-Create declaration has an impact here in Europe, and I don't know, maybe around the world. So I think that's my main goal, is that projects become more than words, become actions, and with that we can inspire more young people to join us and to be seen and heard.
Thank you. And Tasha, what's your hope for the future?
So my one is a little bit, goes a step further than what the guys have said so far. It's not, for me, it's more than just, having us involved in these discussions, but also leading the discussions, leading these conversations, leading in the meetings, and kind of taking, the step, taking the lead towards the kind of steps that we want to see. It's great, when your voices are being heard, but also being given the platform and the opportunity to take leadership.
Great, thanks, Tasha. Amanda.
Yes, so in 5 years to come, I would like to see a transition from having youth voices to having more youth actions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amanda. Emily.
What I would like to see, well, I would like it to be sooner, but I think I hope that at least in next 5 years or like 10 years, what we can see is a food system that is climate resilient, in which young people are working as part of intergenerational action, in which they are seen as like decision makers, someone's co-designing and co-producing different activities and actions and projects within safe systems, and that are also like leading action asset, and they are not just like inspirational speakers. And I also hope that that food system is able to deliver for everyone in a low carbon emitting way, and in a way that upholds principles of like food security and food sovereignty and like social justice as well. And I hope young people are part of that new world that maybe we may have or we can start fighting for now. And my last thing also, I want everyone who is on this panel to please try to take everything you have learned to your organizations and to your workplace and think about how you can better work with young people there. So we are not here just like nice speakers for today, but you take our words really forward with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. And to end with you, Kajal, what's going to make this happen?
I think in 10 years' time, I want to see, rather than decision makers responding to a viral moment and young people, banging at the door, that decision makers are actually coming to young people first and asking them from the moment of creating policies, not just politicians, but, our CEOs, that they're actually co-designing this stuff with young people so that you don't, right now we're in a really reactive mode. We just do, something happens and we have to respond by using the internet to call for change. And I hope that they catch up with us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm sorry we've gone a few minutes over time, but thank you so much to you as panelists. I've learned an enormous amount from you and feel quite humbled and determined to do things a bit differently myself now and the role that I have at the Centre for Food Policy. So thanks for sharing your experience and thoughts with us. Thanks very much to the audience. I'm sorry we weren't able to get through all of your questions, but we got through a fair number. Thank you very much for the audience for being so engaged and for asking such great questions. Do listen and watch the videos, which also have some additional videos with people who weren't able to make it tonight as well. And most importantly, to the audience, do absorb and learn from what we've all learned this evening, and go away and make some change in the work that you do based on what we've learned this evening. So thanks very much to everyone. Fantastic panelists, you've been brilliant. I'll let everyone go off to their evenings now. Thank you so much, and thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Professor Corinna.
Bye bye. Nice to meet you.